Hello and welcome to another Sounds on the Couch interview. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to today's guest. Andy Irvine is a digital music distribution specialist and the CEO of GYROstream. It's a wholly independent and Australian-owned distribution service based in Brisbane. He's got 20 years of career experience in the music industry in supply chain and operations at Universal Music and independent labels Due Process and Create Control. Andy has been involved in all aspects of the release cycle for thousands of major music releases. He launched GYROstream to support the needs of Aussie and New Zealand independent artists with a suite of music services and local support team to assist artists in getting their music out into the world. I know that you'll all get so much out of this interview, so let's just bring him up now. Hello, Andy.
Hi, hey Kaz, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you here.
Great to be here.
All right, well, we'll just jump straight in. So, who is Andy Irvine just in everyday life?
Everyday life. So I have two daughters, 3 and 6 years old. So it's been an interesting year, doing prep and stuff for the first time and going through the whole school thing with the COVID situation. But normal life is just sort of normal kind of family, dad, kind of boring stuff. And then I get to go to work and listen to music and try and, help artists all day long. So I think I'm pretty lucky, and especially, lucky the fact that our business is online predominantly. So, very fortunate that we've been able to continue going this year with all the kind of other stuff that's been going on. But yeah, just normal dad stuff during the weekends and at night times, and, just working the rest of the time trying to grow the business.
Absolutely. So, could you let our audience know a little bit about your background and what's led you to where you are now?
I guess like most probably, industry people, it all starts off, playing in a band and just for the love of music. And I was doing that, more than 20 years ago, releasing, playing in a band, releasing EPs and touring up and down the East Coast, and, working at trying to kind of break through and get a name. And, it sort of went from there. I moved over to London, and most of the band at the same time that in those days moved over as well. I started off working in a music merchandising company, and that was kind of in the mid 2000s, and that was literally in the days where you would pay like $3 or $5 to get a wallpaper downloaded onto your phone, sort of pre iPhones and stuff like that. So people would buy an Iron Maiden wallpaper for $5 so they could have it, as their image on their phone. So I was involved in the digital side of that and dealing with telcos and all that kind of stuff in terms of on the music side and that licensing side of things. And then I started working for Universal Music while I was living in London, in the digital supply chain and operations team, and working on digital scheduling. And that was sort of, at the London base there, kind of took all the, obviously all the UK stuff, but also all the American stuff that came in and then pushed it out to the rest of the world. So that was pretty exciting times, and working on some sort of big albums back in those days. And moved back to Australia and moved to Sydney and was working for Universal there for 4 years, and managing the production department there, which was both physical CD and digital supply chain stuff. And I grew up in Brisbane. I'm a Brizzy boy through and through. So moved back here about 6 years ago, and was working for Due Process, which is an independent label based out of Brisbane. Yeah. And then after I finished that up, I started putting the ideas together for GYROstream, and taking all that knowledge of digital delivery and distribution and trying to package it up into something that would work for the independent market here in Australia, because I think they were really crying out for local support and dealing with local people and kind of having local expertise and local knowledge. Most of them, independent artists at the time, were using all sort of international services and really not getting the service that they needed or deserved to really make an impact in the streaming and digital world.
Oh, excellent. I mean, you've had so much experience and really traveled all over the place, haven't you? Um, you would have seen so much change within that. Do you feel, what do you feel have been the most significant advances throughout that time?
Well, you definitely, when I started, it was, especially working at a major, in those days, it was very much panic about the CD and piracy and all those sorts of things. And it was, the revenues were dropping pretty massively year on year. Really, it was iTunes was the only real digital player where that was making any impact in terms of digital growth and downloads. And piracy was rife, and yeah, so it was a pretty grim time, I guess, for a lot of people in the industry in those days. And obviously since that, we've had, I remember living in the UK when Spotify first launched in 2008. And that was about at least 3 years before it came to Australia. And showing some friends and talking about it and stuff and thinking, this is, regardless of all the conversation about, artist payments and stuff like that, but just knowing then that this was the future of how we were going to kind of consume music, just the fact that, you could have, listen to whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, essentially, and realizing that, this and discovering so much music for the first time, like it was just amazing to kind of be able to, take an artist and then find all these other artists that were like that you never heard before, because you've sort of got this instant access to all this stuff. So I think that over those years, it was really about discovery and access and stuff that people had never really had before, which I found really, really exciting. And it was that's just sort of, I guess, that side of it has gone from strength to strength as streaming has just become really an integral part of life, whether it's music or television or any other kind of consumption of media that we have now.
Yeah, and I mean, all this technology that has come out, like, do you think that in what kinds of ways do you think that it's helped or even potentially hindered artists in terms of moving forward?
Well, I think it's definitely helped in terms of the fact that like when I can, from my experience, when I was putting out EPs, I've still got a couple of hundred CDs sitting under the house from 20 years ago that never got sold. And so it was very much get your CD, tour, just try and do gigs around town, build up your fan base in your own city. Then maybe you get a few fans, in the capital city down, in Sydney or in Melbourne or something like that, and go and do some shows there, and then just almost start again and try and build that audience up. And obviously the difference now is that if you put a song out, you can have that literally globally. Within a week, you can have your song up globally. Your potential audience is now hundreds of millions of people. Obviously, the key is how do you find those people and how do you then get them to become your fans? And that's obviously, I think, the trick that a lot of musicians struggle with, because obviously very creative people, the understanding the digital marketing and all these other sort of things, that it doesn't come easy to a lot of people. So that's where it's the access to the audience is now so much greater, and independent artists have more tools at their disposal than they ever had when it comes to analytics and data and the ability to really know your audience. But so the tools are there, it's just bridging the gap between having the tools and understanding how to use the tools, and that's what really GYROstream, we're trying to bridge that gap as much as we can.
Yeah. So if we do jump into GYROstream a little bit, I was very interested to read a little bit about how the name came about and what it stands for. Would you like to maybe let our audience know a little bit about the name and how it came about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so people that don't know, and most people don't, gyro stands for get your record out. So really, it was just trying to come up with something that really encapsulated what we did, and that's what we do. Is at our core business is getting people's record out, online and to all the other different digital media platforms. But it was always our vision to not just be a delivery service or an aggregator or something. It was really important for us to also make sure that we provided more of a service hub for artists, because most of the artists that we deal with are very, very green. They've not really released much stuff before, and the distribution world is fairly complex. And I was saying before, it's like bridging that gap, but most people aren't really experienced in the digital side of things. And so for us, it was really about within the first month that we launched, we realized straight away that our focus has to be on education, first and foremost, and helping artists on that side of things, as most of them really didn't understand what the best practices were. And so building out that, and then offering, having a PR team, within our business, and having digital marketing within our business, and being able to offer playlisting and sync and all these things that would be hard to get if you're an independent artist. But opening up some of those doors that may not have been there before.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I guess, would you be able to maybe tell us a little bit more about maybe the education side and how you go about teaching these artists these skills?
Yeah, I mean, when people sign up to our site, the first thing that we offer them is a digital release checklist, for example. So, it's sort of a 5 or 6 page document where it's, these are what we recommend people do when they've got a release coming up, and it's 6 or 7 weeks out, or 4 or 5 weeks out from release date. And these are the sorts of things that we're trying to get people to sort of do leading up to the release. And a lot of people would know, probably already do 50% of it or something like that. But then there's a whole raft of other things that, that people should do that leading up to the release, on release day, and post-release as well. That is really important. So, in addition to that, the first couple of years for us was really just getting out there and doing panels and talking to people and really just having our door open, so that people, and we just, countless meetings of artists coming through, just wanted to chat about advice and stuff like that. And just the fact that, people can reach us on the phone, where they couldn't do that with some of the international distribution companies and stuff like that at the time. So, it's really about just, and obviously, it has to be general in terms of, we are a retail distributor, so we take all genres and all types of music. So, but if people call us up or, want to come and have a meeting and talk more specifically about, their particular project, then that's what we do every day as well. But it's really just trying to demystify the whole process a little bit, how to, making sure that, you've got your profile set up on Spotify and your access to your artist accounts, to make sure that you're pitching through the Spotify pitching tool, how the algorithms work in terms of, what happens when people follow your profile and save your track, and all these sorts of things that really start to paint a picture on these services around, you as an artist, and what you need to do to try and, give yourself the best shot when it comes to that. Because everything is so data driven these days. It's the world that we live in. So as independent artists, you have the ability to influence that through, that the data and the algorithms through the way that you sort of, engage in your audience.
When it does come to distribution and the release process, what do you think are the most important things that maybe indie musicians don't often think about?
So the first one is lead time. We get lots and lots of musicians who want to put their song out tomorrow or today or on Monday, on Monday at the end of a week or something like that. So, coming from, having worked on much bigger campaigns, everything takes time to set up. So, we have a very flexible distro system. We can turn things around incredibly quickly if we have to, and make changes and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the best advice to start with is to make sure you give yourself enough lead time. So you need to, make sure you have enough time to run a pre-save campaign, so that you can make sure that, you're building that fan base and getting some emails and stuff like that you can use for marketing down the track when the song comes out. You want to make sure you've got some visual content ready. You want to make sure that, you've got enough time so the distributor can deliver everywhere and it can be ingested everywhere, and that you can, obviously tell fans about it and stuff like that. You want to make sure that you give it enough time so that you can at least pitch it in the Spotify pitching tool more than 7 days out, definitely, more than the week before that it's released, so that it can get considered for editorial playlisting. So yeah, definitely the time one is really the most critical that we see probably a lot of artists not really think about too much. So, and then from there, it's really just having a plan for, not just that release, but how you're then going to frame that in terms of, your overall strategy. So, every artist should really have a 6 and a 12-month and an 18-month plan, so that, and set achievable goals that they think they can reach throughout the course of that. So, a lot of artists record a really great song and go, oh, this is awesome, and they'll put it out and it might do okay, but then there's literally nothing to back it up with. So 6 months goes past and they haven't put another song out, and then, everyone's moved on to the next thing. We all have attention spans like fish these days, unfortunately. So it's really important that, there's a defined strategy at the start, and the way that the streaming services work these days, really, it's all about consistency, and even on social media and stuff, like it's consistency of good content output, it's consistency of good song output, it's consistency of engagement, through the different platforms that you're marketing yourself. If you leave it, like I said, put a good song out and leave it for 6 to 12 months, and put another song out, it's almost like starting from scratch again. So, so it's that. It's also, if you have a body of work, it really is a singles-driven market at the moment, through streaming. Like every time you put a song out, you're giving yourself another shot to try and build that audience a little bit bigger, build that audience a little bit more. And so that over the course of 12 months, with however many songs you've got to come out before maybe an EP or an album or something, that you've grown that audience over that time, not just through your online presence, but maybe through shows and other ways that you've got of building an audience. And so that when the album or EP does come out, you really have an engaged audience that can get excited about that product and sell some vinyl and, potentially sell some CDs and stuff like that as well. So, I think the myth about streaming is that it's like, it's some sort of new way of doing something that's going to all of a sudden bring you this huge audience if you get on big playlists. Like if you get on New Music Friday, you're made or something like that. And unfortunately, that's not the case. It's the same as 20 years ago when I was playing in bands. It's building a steady audience and an engaged audience over time. And it was the same then, and it's exactly the same now, is that it takes time to build fans. And some of our best performing artists get absolutely no editorial support on playlists whatsoever, but they have a dedicated fan base that consistently listen and stream their music all the time, and they do quite well out of it.
Fantastic. And I guess with the current climate, do you find that the release of music has to happen a lot quicker? Like, how often do you feel like artists should be releasing music in the current climate?
Look, it is quicker than what it used to be. Our advice is always, if you've got a 5-track EP, say that ultimately that's where you want to get to, then you're probably wanting to release 3 singles off that in the lead up. It's different for everyone. This is sort of general advice, but you'd be looking at least 3 singles. You'd be looking at sort of 6 to 8 week between each of those. And then the challenge for most artists is filling the gaps there with enough content to keep their audience engaged. So you've got the song comes out, you really need to push people towards the various streaming channels, because that's where you need to engage straight away to kind of push the data and the algorithms. And then a week or 2 later, you might put a music video or some kind of video content out, and you push your audience into YouTube, and you're building up that audience, which is maybe a completely different audience to your Spotify audience. And then you've got other ways of sort of engaging through your other social media channels and driving that further. And then, you're coming out to 2 weeks before the next single eventually, and then you're starting to tease the next thing and getting pre-saves going for that, and you sort of start that cycle over again. So, you need to and so it's a lot of work. And I think with independent artists these days, there's more work than ever involved in this stuff, because you're expected to, be your own radio plugger and manage all your different social channels. And now, every 6 months there's a new social channel that all of a sudden you have to be an expert in, whether it's TikTok or Triller or some other thing that I haven't heard of yet, probably. And yeah, so it's a bit overwhelming for a lot of people, and I completely understand that. So it's really about focusing on the stuff that you can do and that you can do well. And yeah, and like I said, so it's almost like you can never really disappear for too long. There's always got to be sort of something happening.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think when you touched on artists trying to do it all themselves, I think there's a lot of expectation with artists that they really do have to do everything themselves if they are an independent artist. What do you feel about that idea? Do you think that they need to be reaching out and trying to get more help on all of these areas, like the marketing and?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really comes down to, at the end of the day, with all independent artists, the sort of budget that they've got to work with. And I think that kind of starts also like at the recording time as well. I mean, you almost need to figure out, what you want to achieve and figure out a budget for that quite early on in the piece, because what a lot of artists do is they'll spend quite a considerable sum of money recording and mixing and mastering and have a great product, but then they will have no money after that to put into marketing. And as anyone who runs a business or a brand knows, it's you can't have one without the other. You sort of need, and marketing these days, through social and stuff, can be done relatively cheaply. It doesn't need a huge expense, but again, to do it well and to get professionals to help you and stuff, then that's where it obviously costs money. So again, it comes back to good planning initially. But I do subscribe to the notion that you get to a point where you need a good team around you, and that obviously starts with having a good manager, and from there it really builds into your PR and your marketing, and potentially a label. And for us, that's where we feel that distro is so important, because it's my strong belief that distro should be part of that team and part of that family, because ultimately we're the ones that actually get the product onto those commercial services, and you need the product on there to market it and to for the rest of the team to do what they're going to do. So you need someone that you can pick up the phone to and call and say, oh, actually, my radio premiere has been moved forward a day. I need to change the release date. Can you guys get in there and do it? And it just gets done. You can't sort of fire off an email to a robot somewhere and maybe 2 weeks later someone will get back to you and action it. So that's where the distro side of it really does. It's really important to have that team mentality around it.
And how important do you feel that the physical distribution, like CDs and vinyl, is in the current climate?
It's amazing that physical still has this really long tail that it's obviously the vinyl side of things is going really well at the moment. We don't do physical distro into retail, but we do manufacture CD and vinyl, and it's really popular. And it's really important because it's offering artists another potential income stream for their merch and stuff. And this year has been particularly hard because one of the key sales channels for that stuff is obviously live performance, which hasn't happened much. But we've got artists who can successfully pre-sell a whole run of vinyl and actually use that money to then pay for it to be made and then shipped out, and they're not actually dipping into their own pockets to have to fund that. Their fans are essentially funding the manufacture of that. So there's things like that we see all the time that are really successful, and that provides a whole nother income stream for artists. And when it comes to CDs, like we still manufacture a lot of CD orders, and it still works for a lot of genres, but there's obviously certain genres that you just wouldn't do it for at all. And it's really about knowing your audience. Like, you wouldn't drop money on that stuff unless you're really confident that that's what your audience was interested in and wanted. And there's definitely people out there that, that still want this stuff.
Yeah, and how do you feel that crowdfunding applies to this? Do you think that there's a lot more that maybe artists can be doing with crowdfunding to pre-sell their vinyls?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like artists need to think outside the square a little bit at the moment, just with sort of everything that's happened this year, and we keep talking about it. But yeah, it's really important, and there's so many awesome, new tools and stuff that have popped up, and websites to help with everything from the live streaming and that sort of stuff that's happened this year, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's really about trying to think outside the square. And if you can, if your audience, if you've got enough, the fan base to warrant that sort of thing, then you should definitely be doing it, because, like I said, at the moment, any kind of income that bands can supplement because of the no live shows sort of thing is super important.
And also, you've spoken a little bit about going global and the ability that we do have to sort of reach a much bigger fan base. What kind of access do you think that artists potentially have via the distribution channels and via social media? And what are your thoughts of the potential of artists kind of reaching that global market, and maybe even more potentially emerging overseas fan bases?
Yeah, I think one thing that, like I said, like back in my day, it was really about building it from your local area, and I think these days it's the complete opposite. You can build it from anywhere in the world where you think your fans might be, and you've got the data and the tools to try and find that. So, it's not everyone, like in Australia might be into your genre. Like, you might play a genre of music where really does not have a very wide audience here at all, and that is, previously that was tough, but these days, you can find that audience because your music is available everywhere. So it's easier said than done, obviously, but the way that the social media is these days, and the way that people are connected, we always say things like, find all the bands that are doing well, maybe not like the top level bands, but the bands that are just above you and where you want to be in the next kind of 12 months or 2 years. Find those bands, see where their fans are. They're most likely not in their own city or anything like that. They might be halfway across the other side of the world. Look at the data and look at where their fans are, and look at trends and stuff like that to see, if you can start to pick where they are popular and where their audience is, and then focus your efforts on your social media marketing and your digital marketing. Focus your efforts in those places, and try and build audiences in those places first, and make connections and networks with artists in those places. It doesn't all have to be focused here in Australia. So, like I said, a lot of artists that we work with, their biggest markets are definitely not here. It might be in Southeast Asia or South America or the Middle East or, Canada or something like that. So, it's really important to kind of have that global view of your music, and, really try and find where your audience is, and engage those people.
No, that's amazing. And I guess there'd be so much to think about in terms of culture and the ways that those countries operate once you identify where you want to go. But that's great. How do you feel that COVID-19 has impacted or changed the music industry on a longer term basis?
Good question. I think it's obviously, the hardest the hardest hit areas is obviously all live entertainment and festivals, and they're going to be an international touring and all that sort of stuff. And we have no idea when really that's going to sort of have any light at the end of the tunnel. And hopefully next year we start to see. And that's things like festivals are so important for a lot of the newer and mid-tier artists that we work with in particular, because it's this thing that, you know, they can be relatively unknown, but it can get them new fans quite quickly. It can give them good supplementary income and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I'm really hoping the sooner that we can get back to sort of some festival action, the better. And initially as well, because, you know, next year, even if we don't have any international touring, I think that makes a really good opportunity for lots of local artists to kind of step up into that space and make a bit of the name for themselves here. And so, yeah, I think that's probably going to be the sort of the longer term, the biggest long term kind of impact, which is, but, you know, I think a lot of artists that we've worked with this year have spent a lot of time creating music as well. So I think, you know, over the next year or two, we're going to see some really amazing stuff coming out, which I'm very excited about. And I think there's going to be a really high volume of output from a lot of artists because they've had that time to, you know, to create and to really sort of reflect and all that kind of stuff as well. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom just yet. I think, you know, obviously some sectors are really, really struggling at the moment. But, you know, at the same time, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, the sooner we get back to normal, the better. But what is normal?
Exactly. So I guess I'm very interested as well to hear about where you think distribution is headed sort of long term, both in the technology and the culture of it all. Do you think that, what direction do you think it's going to head?
Yeah, so I think over the last sort of, I guess, 5 to 10 years, when streaming really started to sort of hit its strides, there was a definite shift towards like low cost data delivery, like just get content out there and just push it out as cheap as possible. And I think there's really been a shift in the last couple of years for more bespoke, curated service, more premium service. I mean, artists realize that they actually do need more help. Just throwing something up there and hoping that it will stick doesn't actually work. And I think that message is starting to get through, that, you know, you want to, again, building that team around you. Distro is a part of that team, and you need to have that kind of connection with those people that you're working with. And it actually does make a difference in the long run, when you start to get to that level where, you know, it's important. So I think that's definitely been a shift in the mentality of artists, and they're starting to recognize the value in that. And really, the big thing over the last couple of years in particular is that, you know, distribution really, it's not just distribution anymore. Like the biggest players in the world are almost quasi labels these days, in terms of, you know, you know, they're paying advances for artists, they're signing artists on, you know, really competitive deals and rates. You know, they're really kind of competing with the majors and a lot of that stuff. So it's, you know, they're offering advances, they're offering flexible deals. They're pitching to all the DSPs. A lot of them, you know, have offices all over the world and have a big network and stuff like that. And, you know, they're still essentially, you know, distributors, but they're offering all these other value-added services for their artists. And so the temptation to stay independent is greater than ever. Artists really can have, you know, build up a global audience and stay independent. And you probably, you know, it would be hard to say that 10 years ago. And these days it's happening all over the place. So it's exciting for independent artists in that sense.
Yeah, it's so much more accessible. It's very interesting. Is there anything else that you would like to maybe share or advise our independent artists on our platform?
I mean, it's just, I guess, we as a company, for us, we're always up for a chat and a conversation and to sort of help people out as much as we can. So, our team's based in Brisbane, and so that we're always contactable, email and phone and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, all people can come and swing by the office. It's a bit hard with borders closed at the moment, but hopefully that changes relatively soon. And like I said, just I guess in terms of advice for artists, it's going back to what I said earlier around consistency and planning and having a good content strategy and just believing that that it's possible, I suppose, because I think that a lot of artists get quite disillusioned with streaming in many different ways, and some of it definitely justified. But the persistence is the key, and the fact that distribution really has never been easier means that it's easier than ever to kind of pick yourself up and dust yourself off and give it another crack and stuff like that. So it's really, that part of it's really important, is that just because something doesn't work this week or next week, it doesn't mean that if you persevere for another couple of months that something won't turn around.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.